All right. Welcome everyone. Happy to welcome you to today's Zoom meeting. Jamie is out of the office today, so I'm filling in. So let's get started with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America,
to the rest, for which it stands, one nation,
under God, indivisible by all,
with
liberty and justice for all. I did panic. I was like, do I know the words to this without singing along to it with everyone else with the radio? So sorry about that. Thank you, everyone. Our announcements for today. We have club luncheon coming up with Karen talking about the Rotary Foundation. Plus, we are adding in Randy Olson to talk about membership. Lunch will be with Peace and Freedom Bakery and Labyrinth. They're bringing soup. So we'll have that club luncheon next Monday at the Plex. And then on the last Thursday of the month, instead of doing Zoom, we're going to do an offsite Rotary meeting at the Boys and Girls Club. So it's a brag bag lunch. So bring your own lunch and we'll have a tour of the new facility and learn a little bit more about the work being done at Boys and Girls Club. So Judge and Ryan are eager to welcome us.
What do you gotta go for? Huh?
And then I did forget right after the Pledge of Allegiance to ask if there was anyone we needed to keep in our thoughts for this upcoming week. All right. Next up is our new initiative, our Rotary's Care Committee, that's going to be led by Park. So if you are interested in serving on that committee, we'd love to have you volunteer. And then also, if you have a member who could use a card, a call, or a word of encouragement, please send that information to Rotary Club of Ames, and we'll make sure that we are reaching out to that member. Any questions on that? I know Katie McMahon's joined that group too, but Park would certainly appreciate one or two more people to help. All right, I think that's it for announcements. So I'm very excited to welcome Matthew O'Neill, Professor and H.A. Wallace Chair for Sustainable Agriculture in the Department of Plant Pathology, Entomology, and Microbiology at Iowa State University. Not sure what's happening there on the share, but Professor O'Neill will share insights and data from the innovative Alliant Energy-ISU Solar Farm partnership. This 10-acre utility scale solar farm built in 2024 is a living laboratory where ISU faculty and students conduct crucial research on agrivoltaics. You'll have to pronounce that correctly, Matthew. Determining which farming and conservation practices can be carried out in an environmentally and economically sustainable way alongside solar panels. So without further ado, we'll turn it over to Matthew. He's going to share his screen. Hopefully, I'm not sure why we're seeing Selden. There we go.
You hear me okay?
Yep, we can see it.
So thanks for the introduction, Tammy, and the opportunity to share some of the work we're doing at Iowa State University on this topic of agrivoltaics, fancy word that I'm going to define a little bit later in the talk. So what I was hoping to accomplish today is not only give you an update on agrivoltaics, define it, but also explain what kind of issue this practice solves. So let's start with what's the problem. As a scientist, this is the beginning of most science. We start with what's the problem that somebody has asked us to help solve. So give you a little setting, US solar energy sector is growing. This summary of data from the US Energy Information Administration gives you a sense of how many gigawatts of electricity are being produced by solar panels in the United States over about a 10-year period. And there's two scales that are being represented here. There's the light orange, which is small scale, typically means behind the meter. This is solar panels that would be put on roofs or in short stretches next to a farm building, generating kilowatts of energy. And then the darker orange is utility scale. These are much larger solar farms that are generating electricity in the megawatts, often for utility companies like Mid-American, Alliant Energy, some of the two utility companies that service Iowa. And this growth is being seen worldwide. And it was predicted back in the early 80s by a group of engineers at the Freiburg Institute in Germany. And they could see the trajectory in how solar panels were developing. They were becoming more efficient to a point where they anticipated that many utility companies will start using solar panels into the future to be a source of electricity. And that's the case now, where solar is one of the cheapest, fastest ways to generate new electricity. But these engineers also identified a problem, and that was that there will be a need for land to put these solar panels on, and rooftops and parking lots won't be enough. And this is going to result in an overlap between solar farms and actual farms, because many of the features that make for a good agricultural farm make for a good solar farm. Flat land on well-drained soils that are easy to put pylons in to hold the panels up. So they proposed a way to resolve this conflict by creating this term agrivoltaics. That was back in the 80s. They defined the term and they said, well, there could be a bunch of things you could do. Well, smash cut to more recent times, where ecologists from around the world have started exploring what the microclimate is like under solar panels. And what they found in this paper that was published in 2023 is that in this diagram, they show you that it is cooler under the panels and wetter, which provides an environment that could be suitable for a lot of living things to thrive in. And there could be some land use opportunities to take land that's currently used for agriculture or industrial areas and get dual use out of it, both generate electricity, but also provide habitat by planting vegetation under and around the panels. And in the US, some farmers who have been approached by developers are already taking advantage of this opportunity and thinking about how they could rent out their land for farming or for solar farming, but also continue to do some kind of agricultural practices under and around them. So they're applying agrivoltaics. So what is agrivoltaics? Well, simply put, it's just the use of land for solar energy production and agriculture. And it's very broad. There are many ways in which agriculture can be practiced alongside solar. It can look like this system where the solar panels have been mounted to allow for commodity agriculture like what we see in Iowa, in this case, soybean production, with the panels placed wide enough apart that the landowner can continue to farm in the way that they were used to. It can also be a site for horticulture production. Many fruits and vegetables do not need or even want full sun. The broad leaves that you see here for the summer squash are more suitable for a shady environment, which they can find in a solar farm. And agriculture isn't limited to plants. It can also include livestock. And the most common form of livestock production at solar farms is sheep, as you see here. The sheep benefit by having some shade to avoid the stress of the sun, and forage that's available to them, oftentimes to the sheep herder for free, because the solar site manager has to maintain vegetation at a height that doesn't shade the panels. They need four-legged lawnmowers. But we can also think about livestock with 6 legs, and honeybees can be added to sites where the vegetation has been established such that there's floral resources throughout the year. And so the question, as we're getting more and more solar farms online, is just how useful, how practical are these agrivoltaic practices? A paper that came out in 2024 by a group led through scientists at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory and Argonne National Laboratory, with a title that should resonate with people from Iowa. If you build it, will they come? And they summarize the insect community response to habitat establishment at solar energy farms in Minnesota. And so basically what they did was plant many of the native perennial flowering species we would see in prairies and watched the bees that came to them. So they tracked native bee abundance that you see here in this graph. And over time, as the plants established and produced flowers, they see an increase in native bee abundance at these solar farms. So then the question is, can we build it? And we can. And at Iowa State University, we've entered into a public-private partnership with Alliant Energy to model what we think is a way to get agrivoltaic practices into our landscape. And over the last 5 years, we've come up with a system that we think could work for others, which involves 3 ingredients and 3 steps. The 3 ingredients are a landowner, in this case, Iowa State University, a utility company, in this case, Alliant Energy, and oftentimes landowners aren't necessarily farmers. So we're bringing in farmers to the site in the form of students and faculty at ISU who are interested in exploring this topic. So this is just our unique situation, but these 3 ingredients could be replicated at other places throughout Iowa, if not the Midwest. And then what are the 3 steps? Well, the first step is to develop a lease agreement between the landowner and the utility company. These are often 25-year plus leases that generate a lease payment that's 2 to 3 times what the landowner could get if they were renting to a tenant farmer. In this case, we entered into a lease agreement with Alliant Energy for a site that's about 10 acres. I'll tell more about that later. We have a site management plan to develop and maintain the site, maintaining vegetation in places where we can't farm, like directly under the panels that are very low to the ground, and then a site access agreement that allows us to go into the farm as needed to practice farming and establish some conservation activities. So what that resulted in is a solar farm placed in this little section of about a 600-acre farm that's managed by this and owned by Iowa State University. And in this little corner, we've placed 10 acres fenced out with solar panels generating electricity that goes into the grid. At that site, we've got 2 different types of panel configurations. On your right, we've got panels that are in what's called a fixed tilt configuration. The rows go east to west, and they're facing the south. These don't move over the course of the day. They're in a fixed configuration. This generates power by the light hitting the panels. On the other side, we've got, oh, and I should point out that the red and yellow here represent panels in 2 different heights. So the fixed configuration, we've got an industry standard height and a little bit higher height to see if that facilitates farming. And then over here, we've got our single axis tracking configuration. These panels go north to south, and they track the sun as it goes from east to west. Here you see it at noon. These panels are tracking the sun so that they're facing the east in the morning, horizontal in midday, and then facing the west by the evening. And it's here that we're doing most of our farming because this is the utility scale configuration. This configuration produces more electricity than the fixed tilt that I just showed you. And we think if we can prove farming here, then we can prove that farming can be done in any configuration. And we elected to go with fruits and vegetables. And with funding from the Department of Energy, We formed a multidisciplinary team to answer questions related to horticulture and beekeeping. We've worked with economists at Iowa State to ask questions about the economic benefit to farmers and landowners, and then engineers to ask if that farming affects the energy production. And finally, we've brought in an outreach coordinator to bring people to the site to give them a sense of what we're doing and what the results are. So this is a simple map to show you two things. First is the 8 different types of vegetation that we're studying at our site. And that includes grass and clover, a pollinator mix that's comprised of some 15 species of plants that are attractive to bees, managed in 2 different ways, a standard management and a conservation management. And then horticultural crops selected by Dr. Ajay Nair and Suzanne Slack in the horticulture department at Iowa State. Broccoli, squash, bell peppers, and then on the fruit side, raspberries and strawberries, perennials that could be grown and maintained for many years. And these 8 treatments are applied to that single access tracking configuration. These are the panels going up and down, north to south. We've got 8 experimental units in 3 blocks with each of the 8 treatments randomly assigned within a block. And we're growing those vegetation on either side of the panel, except for raspberries, which are actually grown directly underneath the panels. And this is what it looks like. For our broccoli is not shown, but this is our squash and kind of mid-season, early season peppers, the strawberries that are established and maintained throughout the year. And then this is, these are grapes, raspberries that are grown directly under the panels. They take a few years to establish before we have to trellis them. And I should point out that we're growing these mostly here in this region, and all of those are represented in our open plots, so we can see how the panels affect their growth. But I should point out, I'm an entomologist, and I'm very interested in insects. And we note that many of those crops that we're growing need pollination. So we brought to our site honeybees. And this opens up another question. And that question is, not only are the honeybees finding the crops, but how are the honeybees benefiting from the vegetation we're attempting to establish at this site? So we're asking an additional question of whether solar farms can improve honeybee productivity. And we're answering this question not only at the Alliant Energy site at Ames, but also the SunSmart Solar Farm established by the city of Ames, and another site established by Alliant Energy in Sheraton. These vary a bit in size and in agricultural activities. At ISU, we're doing fruits and vegetables. SunSmart is doing sheep grazing, and Hy-Vee is establishing some vegetation for pollinators in that grass and clover mix. So when it comes to measuring the bees' response, each site gets 4 colonies that a graduate student, Carl Bowling, checks on regularly. Here he is at the end of last year's growing season with the 4 colonies just before we harvest the boxes that have the honey in them. Those would be the supers painted in yellow. And we use a leaf blower to blow the bees out of the boxes and then return these boxes to the horticulture research farm at Iowa State, where we extract the honey from them using a centrifuge, which pulls the honey out of the comb and into our containers. And Carl did a really good job of keeping track of each one of these boxes, these super boxes, identifying not only the colony, but the location that they were kept at, so that we can estimate how much honey was produced at those 3 sites on a per colony basis. And the next slide is one that I get really excited about because it's some data. So on this axis right here, on the left-hand side, is the average amount of honey produced per colony in kilograms. And down here is the locations, those 3 locations, and the results from 2024 and 2025. So if you look at 2024, our ISU site was the lowest producer compared to the SunSmart and Hy-Vee location. We think Hy-Vee did really well at 2024 because they were surrounded by soybeans. Soybeans produce nectar in a way that corn doesn't, which was what surrounded our site at ISU in 2024. But in 2025, we saw a huge improvement. We saw improvements at all the locations, but especially at ISU, we're seeing a 412% increase. And I need to tell you that this is in kilograms, not pounds. If we convert that to pounds, that's about 120 pounds of honey per colony, which is twice the state average for Iowa. So this site became a really, really productive site for beekeeping. And why is that? Well, we think that's because of the clover, especially, that was established this past year. We seeded a grass and clover mix in 2024. That clover took a few years, or a year, to get this white carpet that we saw starting in June. In 2024, it was mostly grass. In 2025, it was this white carpet of clover. Took a year for that clover to establish. And most honey in the Midwest comes from clover. If you go into Hy-Vee or Fairway, you'll see jars and bottles of clover honey. But clover wasn't the only thing that was producing flowers at the site. And our student, Carl Bowling, went into the site and counted the number of flowers in our experimental plots. So we had those 8 different treatments you see listed here. And then the amount of flowers on a log scale down on the x-axis. And he's showing those results for July, the month right before we harvested honey. And a couple things to note here. In 2024, we were seeing dozens of flowers across all 8 of those treatments. But in 2025, we're starting to see thousands of flowers in the pollinator mix, hundreds in the grass and clover, and even in the raspberries, which suggests to me that these are the types of vegetation that the bees are using to get that 400% increase in honey production. So I want to end with a last chapter, which is kind of a flip the script on what I usually talk about, which is, can agrivoltaics unlock private land for pollinator conservation? And instead ask if agrivoltaics can unlock private land for solar development. And what do I mean by that? Well, right now, the state of Iowa is one of the leading producers of renewable energy in the United States, with most of that coming from wind, as summarized by this article in the Des Moines Register in 2024. Solar at that point was only about 1%, a little over 1% of the energy we use in the state of Iowa. But that's starting to change. In February of this year, Mid-American announced that they were going to generate 800 megawatts of solar energy in the state of Iowa. And if you convert it takes about 7 to 10 acres to generate a megawatt of power, you can imagine that there's going to be a lot of acres under solar panels going forward. Colleagues at Iowa State University, like Hung-Lee Feng and her postdoc Jian Chen, have surveyed the population of Iowa, asking them, what do they think about this? And what they found is an interesting result. Across a spectrum of people saying they're not at all in support to extremely supportive, but most are in the middle, moderately supportive. It's a bell-shaped curve. When she further asked all of these people in Iowa, what's your greatest concern for solar development? They say that, well, 32% say that they identify land use concerns, specifically the potential loss of farmland as the primary challenge associated with the adoption of utility-scale solar energy systems. This is a callback to the concern that engineers had back in the 80s when they saw that solar power is going to become a more common source of energy production.
Hello.
Yeah, hello. Good to have you on. So what does this mean for Iowa? Well, some groups have noted that across the 99 counties, there's variation in the zoning ordinances. This is an assessment by the Clean Grid Alliance. They produced this map last September, showing across different color schemes here, the level of restrictions placed on developers if they wanted to put in a solar facility. From workable ordinances to straight up moratoriums, with many counties having no zoning ordinances in place yet. But that was in 2024. And some changes are starting to take place. I want to pick on one in particular, and that's at Lynn County. If you have trouble sleeping, can I recommend downloading solar ordinances? There's a lot of details that go into them that include defining things like agriculture and agrivoltaics. And what's interesting about Lynn County's definition of agrivoltaics is it includes commercial products ranging from crops, livestock products, and honey, all cultivated or raised under and around solar panels. And this is where my wife told me I have to take my reading material out of it because I got kind of excited. This suggests that Lynn County has identified agrivoltaic activities, especially beekeeping, as a way to get dual use out of sites that are coming online into the future. So to wrap up, if you'd like to learn more about this topic, please consider going to our website and scheduling a tour. Last year in 2025, our outreach coordinator, along with our colleagues in horticulture, conducted over a dozen tours of the site that were open to the public. And we've even scheduled tours for specific groups. So if you found this interesting and would like to see more, please visit our site, get in contact with Mike Killewald or me, and we'd love to have you out and see what we're doing at the farm. Thank you all very much. I'm going to stop sharing and maybe there's some time for questions.
Hi, Matthew. Yes, there are time for questions, and we have one in the chat that I'll read to you. How much have state or federal administrators in 2025 affected solar energy production now and the future, for better or for worse?
Yeah, so part of what's called the Big Beautiful Bill has had an effect on renewable energy by sunsetting tax credits for renewable energy development. Those will come to an end, I believe, in 2027. And there's a bit of a scramble to get projects started. I believe they have to be under construction by June of next year to still receive those credits. What's unclear to us is how profitable solar will be in absence of those tax credits. But what I'm starting to see are projects that are being planned that will not get those tax credits. And I think that's because the projections for our need for electricity are growing exponentially, in part because of the data centers that are needed to fuel the AI-driven models that are becoming frequently used for industry, as well as an attempt to bring manufacturing back to the United States. Much of that manufacturing needs electricity. So even without the tax credits, solar remains one of the fastest, cheapest ways to produce electricity.
Great, thanks. Can you compare the retail sales benefits of the various crops harvested under the solar panels?
That's a great question. I really can't because we're still generating the data for that. I can say for beekeeping, our work suggests that we could make beekeeping much more profitable at sites like ours compared to what we see throughout the state of Iowa. One other way to think about this is in this slide that I'm about to share. I tell everybody that visits our site that what they're seeing is a location where multiple revenue streams can be generated. So this is a little diagram to help illustrate that. This yellow box represents the solar farm, and these arrows represent the revenue streams, with the width equal to what we estimate to be the value of those revenue streams. So one of the biggest ones is the money generated from the sale of electricity. And that revenue goes to the developers and utility companies. We expect the width of this to grow into the future as there's greater demand for electricity. But there are 4 other revenue streams that go to different parties. There's the lease revenue that goes to the landowner, and that's often in the form of a 25-year lease that guarantees income over that time period. There needs to be some management at the site, and that can be revenue generated by the landowner if they agree to do that management, or to a site manager. There will also be tax revenue generated from a solar farm. And my understanding is solar farms that are built on ag land are going to have a higher tax rate than if it was ag land. And the last one, and this is the question that your members asked, well, how much farming revenue can you generate? And this is really unknown to us. We're still generating the data to know just how productive farming can be at a solar site. I think for the beekeeping side, we've answered it pretty clearly. It can be more productive. But for the fruits and vegetables, it's taking us some time to estimate that, because some of those are perennials and take a while to come online before you actually have a harvestable fruit. But what's interesting is this land is already producing revenue without having to do any farming. So I think of this as extra money. And access to solar farms, when they're developed by utility companies, can result in land being given, or access being given to farmers for free, if not with an incentive. Because if the developer has to mow the lawn, it's going to cost them money. But if they could pay a sheep herder or a farmer to manage that vegetation, it's going to reduce their operation and maintenance costs. Sorry.
Great. I have a question. Oh, no. Oh, there's one just popped up, and then I'll ask my question. What is the percent difference in energy from rotating versus fixed solar panels?
It's about 20%. So the rotating, or that single axis tracking that I showed you, that produces more electricity to the tune of about 20% more than if it's fixed. There is a trade-off though. It costs more money to build those tracking systems. So for smaller sites that are 1 acre and below, fixed tilt ends up being the most economical. But as you get to utility scale, where they're trying to generate tens of hundreds of megawatts, the single axis tracking pays for itself.
Great. My question on the flowers, I'm calling it the flower slide. You showing the growth between 24 to 2025. Is that the results of more flowers or the vegetables being planted, or does the pollinations from the bees increase the flowers year over year?
Yeah, I'll bring that slide back up again. So you're right, the crops do produce flowers, but this graph shows the amount of flowers per area. And it's so for raspberries, squash, pepper, broccoli, strawberries, we're looking at dozens of flowers per plot. Raspberries were a bit more productive. They're in the hundreds. But the grass and clover, specifically the clover and the pollinator mix, are producing easily 10 times more. So I think where we're seeing the biggest bang for our buck is in these treatments. And I should point out that grass and clover is planted as like an industry standard. They know, the developers know, they have to get some vegetation down to keep that soil in place, to make sure that they can return the site the way they found it. And they've described this mix as bulletproof. So they're going to plant this. Ideally, they're going to plant it everywhere, and then maybe carve out some places for farming to happen. Does that make sense?
Right, but yep, but are they planting it every year, or it's once it's planted, it just comes back?
That's a good question. So we picked some perennial varieties of grass and clover so that it could be planted once. But we're also investigating how well it establishes so that we get a sense of whether we need to go back and replant. We've seen the grass and clover to establish really well. We haven't needed to replant that one.
Okay. All right, a couple more questions. Does Iowa topography or location impact how productive these farms can be? Any projection on scale or number of acres involved?
Yeah, those are really good questions. So the scale and number of acres is a bit in play. Mid-America is developing out, we think, 800 megawatts. So that's going to be about 5,000 to 6,000 acres. But they're not the only company developing solar power. There are many smaller companies that are developing sites around the state. One Energy Renewable is an example of one. Lightsource BP has entered into the state trying to develop sites, mostly for rural communities. I don't have a good estimate of how many acres that is. Your first part of that question, I forgot. It was.
Does Iowa topography or location impact how productive these farms can be?
Yeah, one of the biggest factors for siting a solar farm is access to the grid. If it's going to be a utility scale solar farm, they have to have access to the grid to put that electricity out there for customers to use. So if you've ever looked at the maps of our utility grid, it's not like a chessboard where there's a bunch of parallel or not parallel, but gridded out lines. It's a little bit messy, and so not every place in Iowa is going to be accessible for a solar farm. After that, it comes down to some siting issues related to topography. The flatter, the better, but you can put solar on hillsides of not too extreme grades. But I think one of the biggest issues is community acceptance. Having the zoning ordinances in place that allow for that type of development to occur.
Great, and I think this is almost a follow-up question. Should solar sites be close to ISU or paved highways? And it sounds like they just need to be close to utility grids.
Yeah, it would be nice if we had at ISU more access to solar farms, because that would allow us to explore different agrivoltaic practices. But for the larger state, meeting its current and future energy needs, there's likely going to be more of these spread throughout the 99 counties. And that's kind of interesting, because if that happens, it could open up land for beginning farmers. Many of the developers tell us that they would make the land available for free if a farmer was interested in working at the site. Because again, it saves them some money on operation and maintenance. And what we've heard from our colleagues in ag extension is access to land is the number one barrier to new farmers. It's really hard to get land to do farming. So what I think could happen is not growing corn and soybeans at a solar farm, but grazing livestock, producing fruits and vegetables, maybe even expanding beekeeping. And this could be a way for new people to get into farming, which can be profitable at a smaller scale than, say, growing corn and soybeans.
Okay, we have, if these solar farms are located on what once was fertile soil that grew crops to feed the world, how does grass and clover fit into productive soil?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's one that is being investigated not only by our group, but many others. So one of the concerns for developing a solar site is how that's going to affect the soil over the 25 years of a contract. And there's some evidence that allowing that land to rest, putting in perennial vegetation can build up the soil organic matter, which can improve soil productivity. And it's unclear to us yet when those benefits and to what degree those benefits would accrue. It's a longer question to be explored.
Great. We've got one more. How does the cost per kilowatt differ between wind and solar?
That's a really good question. And I have to remind everybody, I'm an entomologist, not an engineer. But that's a great question for our colleague, Ann Kimber, who's the director of the Electric Power and Research Center. And when we give tours, she comes out and takes those questions. One thing I've heard from her and our colleague at Alliant is that wind and solar can be complementary. As you can imagine, solar is more productive in the summer than in the winter. You still are able to generate some electricity in the winter, but daylight hours are shortened. The angle of the sun is altered, so we don't get as much. But wind production goes up in the winter. So it's, as we've heard from the from the utility companies, these can be complementary. To what extent that the amount of energy being produced, what's the cost effectiveness of that? I don't know off the top of my head.
Hey, Matt, I'm Mason. I work with Nick at Alliant
Oh,
Energy.
hey.
So yeah, you're spot on. They're fairly complementary and relatively close. Capacity factors always will drive that, and you're right on. They do complement each other in those seasonal months, winter, as you've described. Typically being where the wind farms can be most economical, and then obviously solar in the summertime. So. But they're about in relative harmony for the most part as far as what they're generating for cost per kilowatt hour or price per kilowatt hour in the market.
Thanks for jumping in there, Mason.
Yep. Yeah, thanks for the facts check.
No, you're doing a great job. So,
and I got to say, Alliant's been a great partner in this. They've helped us not only in building out the site, but keeping and access and giving us feedback, both in terms of the data, the energy production data. We have access to that to see how the vegetation might affect that. Yeah, and then also feedback about how comfortable they are with us doing farming in and around their panels.
All right. I believe the chat has slowed down. Anyone else further questions?
I don't think you mentioned this. How are you marketing this to farmers, specifically farmers who are near utility grids?
What do you mean by marketing?
Like, are you reaching out saying, hey, are you interested in solar farming on we think this is a great site?
Oh, no, I don't do that. That's more of a commercial relationship in terms of a developer reaching out to farmers, asking them if they would be interested in entering into these contracts. What we've done on our end is try to be a place where farmers could see what is possible and ask questions about what the nature of that contract and that relationship would be like. And then maybe provide some guidance in how to navigate that relationship if they want to have farming at a solar farm developed on their land. And so going back to there's 3 steps and 3 ingredients. The most important step if you want farming is to generate a site access agreement that allows the farmer to go into the site. Because once it's under a lease, it's the solar developers, utility companies' property. And they put fences around these and, limit access for a lot of reasons, including safety. So what I think we've demonstrated is you can safely farm under and around these panels, but you have to get that permission, and it's got to be in writing. It's got to be in the form of a contract that is going to be honored. And Alliant Energy has done a great job in helping us work through that contract process so that both we're comfortable with the access so we can get in when we need to farm, but so are they. And they know that people coming into the site are going to be safe, and the equipment will be as well.
Great, thank you. And I know you just had tours at the end of October. Do you do specific tours to the public throughout the year, or people can just call and ask? Or?
There's a couple ways to do this. So we've wrapped up our open house season for this year, but we'll start posting probably December, January, the schedule for next year. And the open houses are free. Anybody can attend. We ask people to RSVP so that we've got enough hard hats and safety goggles, safety glasses for everyone. But if those times don't work, we have an outreach coordinator that can schedule private events for groups. Well, I shouldn't say private. I should say, separate times for groups that would work for them. So yeah, am I using this term correctly? The Rotarians. If you would like to see this up close and personal and our open house schedule doesn't work for you, by all means, we can work with you to have you come out and take a look.
Great. Thank you, Matthew. We appreciate your time on today. It's a great presentation. Lots of good information. And
Thank you.
obviously lots of interest from our group too, based on the amount of questions. So thank you.
Cool. Yeah. If I can ever be of help, let me know, and appreciate the opportunity to share our work with you.
Great. Okay. Let's go ahead and end with our 4-way test. Of the things we think, say, or do, is it the truth?
Mhm.
Is it fair to all concerned?
Will it build
Will it
goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Great. Thanks, everybody.